Chester Jackson. I am an adoptee and adopted parent, and I've been working in this field for a long, long time. I'm going to try to keep my adoptee hat on today.
That's why I won't be next to you.
That's
I'm
right.
going to knock
There we
you
go.
off and
There we
put
go.
another one on.
But every now and then, I slip into one of the other hats. I'm glad you all joined us, and hopefully we will have a fun full exchange.
I'm Jessica. I'm a Colombian adoptee. I was born in Colombia and I was raised on Long Island. I came to Long Island when I was 3 months old. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I have 2 kids at home. I work in the post-adoption world. I work with an organization in Manhattan called Spence Chapin, which is one of the oldest adoption agencies in the country. And I get to work in post-adoption services, which means that I get to help provide and create services for adoptees and their families by creating resources and support groups and community-based non-clinical groups. And it's probably the most important work that I will ever do, being a mother. It's been really incredible to watch our community of adopted people grow and find one another. And because our network is so wide, I was able to find AFFCNY, Kylie, I've gotten to know Chat and Annette. And it's been really, really wonderful, and I'm glad to be here with you guys.
Hi, I am Annette O'Connell. I am a domestic born and adopted person. I was born in the Bronx during the baby scoop era. I was raised in Rockland County, New York. I have always known that I was adopted. It's always just been a huge part of my identity. I am a mother. I have a 19-year-old son who is a firefighter. I always wear my firefighter bracelets that say no one fights alone. I love that motto because it's also applicable to adopted people, that we are all in this together. I was brought home to my parents when I was about 5.5 months old. I always said that if I ever wrote a book that I would entitle the book Chapter 1.5, because that's where my story actually began. I do not have a Chapter 1. I came with absolutely no information except for the fact that I was allergic to amoxicillin. Nobody was ever told that it was actually an anaphylaxis reaction to amoxicillin. We learned that the hard way when I was in my 20s. I entered what I call adoption land online only in 2014. And I sat down to what's on Facebook. I've been on Facebook for years. And I thought, let me just see if there's any like adopted groups out there. And I found them and I sat at my computer sobbing, saying, holy shit, I wasn't the only one. These feelings were not just for me and me alone. I was not abnormal. At that point, at various points in my life, I had always been told that I would get my original birth certificate when I turned 18. So when I turned 18, I was still living at home. I sat outside my parents' mailbox every day for 2 weeks. Mike the mailman would come and every day tell me, not today, Annette. And 2 weeks later, I finally flew in like this ain't ever happening. Okay, I don't need to sit here on the stoop anymore. So when I found Adoption Land online, I also discovered that for decades, there had been pending legislation in Albany to overturn a law that said that adopted people were not entitled to their original birth certificate. And when I discovered that, I said, I have found my people and I am going to help get this done. Since then, I have never looked back. I was before I started working for AFFCNY, because I do work here, I'm part of the communications and conference community. I'm in the back room doing the virtual behind the scenes here at the conference. Before I started working here, I encountered Claudia online. We became good friends and we said, we're going to take this on. And we were very blessed to find a wonderful group of people. We were able to form the New York Adoptee Rights Coalition, and in conjunction with the American Adoption Congress and other organizations, we finally did overturn New York law. Aside from that, amen. It took years. It was a long, hard fight. aside from that, like I said, I always identified as adopted. My son has always known that I was adopted. He would come to Albany with us, speak to legislators at the age of 10. Why are you doing this? Because I can have my birth certificate, why can't my mom have hers? I am in reunion. It's challenging and it's complicated. I think right now, what we would like to know is what everyone here anticipates this particular workshop will be about, or what you think you will get from this workshop before we actually start. So if anyone has any ideas of what you think this will be about, please do raise your hand. Virtual people are welcome to unmic themselves, and obviously if someone else is talking, don't, chime in over, but anyone who has any thoughts on what your expectations are, please feel free to share with us.
And a hush.
In a hush.
I don't know what it's about, but I came to learn your perspective because it's important, because I have adopted children. And the more I can understand, the more I can come alongside them and help them. So that's why I'm here. I don't know what it's about, but.
Bravo to you. Bravo to you for being willing to do that.
My daughter went away to college. She's adopted from Guatemala. The only picture she took to college was her birth mother, and I'm glad I kept it. My husband wanted to throw it away, and I said, I think they're going to keep this, and it's just huge to her, so I'm kind of learning.
Excellent. Is there anyone?
Jane's got one.
Jane
I was
has
just
one.
gonna say private parts, I guess that's our internal repercussions from adoption and the things that, maybe we never talked about or adopted parents might not be aware of, our trauma.
Trauma's a good one. Is there anyone virtually who?
No.
No? So when I said that I would write a book and it would be entitled Chapter 1.5, the actual full title was going to be Chapter 1.5, Please Don't Touch My Private Parts. Because we teach our children that their private parts are to be respected. We teach them no one is to touch their private parts. What we do not teach them is that private parts are not just anatomical. They are parts of our stories, parts of our lives that we do not always choose to share with people. What my experience as an adopted person has always been is that people in my inner circle and outside of my inner circle have always felt that they could share my story. And my story is mine to tell. It is not theirs to tell. And I am hyper critical and careful about what I choose to share in what areas, with whom I choose to share it. The main space where I have found to be home has been with my people, with my adopted people in my adopted groups. So our goal here is we have no plan. We don't have a presentation. This, as far as we've gotten here, is as far as we have planned. The rest of it is going to be inviting you into our home where we have our conversations. And there may be things that come up, excuse me, where one of us may just say, I'm not comfortable sharing that here because this is not truly an adopted only space, okay? So we just ask you to be open-minded. We ask you if we want people to participate. If you have a question, we want you to raise your hand, whether it's virtually or in person, and ask those questions. But if it's something that's maybe a little bit too close to our private parts, we may just say no. One of the things that happened to me as far as my activism goes with adoptee rights, I am additionally to being here at the coalition, I was the spokesperson, as I said, for the New York Adoptee Rights Coalition. I am a board member of Adoptees United, and I am a board member of Bastard Nation. I have had every New York news station contact me to do a story. I was once interviewed by 2020. I had them pull my story because they got too close to home. And I actually wrote a piece for New York Adoptee Rights Coalition on why I will not do stories. Because the press And the general population, they love the Lifetime movie. They love what we call reunion porn. They love the teary-eyed meeting in the airport. They don't want to know why that has to happen. They don't follow up to see how that goes. They just want the private parts and then it's done. So that's, I think, right, where we just want to go here is we're just gonna, we all three run, Chester and I do an adoptee support group here at the coalition virtually. We also do an adopted professionals, so for people like us who are adopted and work in the field, because that comes with its own baggage. Jessica does a similar group for adopted person support at Spence Chapin. We don't all agree on everything. I personally don't like the term adoptee. I think it is like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It is a made up word that is made to make us feel like something normal for an abnormal situation. If you Google synonym for adoptee, you get words like ward, charge, protege. And I was not a ward, a charge, or a protege. And also comes up adopted child. As you can see, I am not a child. We all grow up. And yet we are always referred to, specifically within legislation, as adopted children. So some others here don't mind the word adoptee. So even in our workshop words, here was adoptee and here was adopted person. Like I use adopted person because that's what I more relate to. So we make our compromises. We don't always agree, and you may see that. Who knows? I don't know what we're going to talk about.
But that's also a really interesting point too, because, with, the three of us being adopted people and joining in these spaces and hosting these spaces, creating spaces for adopted people, you'll learn so much about how other people identify, the things that they identify with. And you start to create your own comfortability within this group of people about how you want to identify yourself, and what words, because words have obviously a lot of meaning, and you have to put your own meaning to how you're going to identify yourself. And the spaces that we get to be in and that we get to create are therapeutic, they're communal, but they're therapeutic, but they're also these spaces where you get to just feel as though you're in a shared space with people who understand your experiences, and you're also learning. So they're emotional, they can be heavy, they can be exhausting, they can be everything you can imagine, but you're learning so much about yourself because you're putting yourself in a space with other people who've had similar lived experiences. We can be in the room with international adoptees across the world, don't even speak the same language, have the same experiences. And that is so powerful. And that's why I think the work that we do, and of course, we can't really say too many great things came from the pandemic, but these spaces that we found ourselves in, these spaces that we were able to find each other and create more spaces to help people through these difficult times. And as they're learning about themselves, we can actually pick out words that we will identify with, and we'll go out to the world, and we're also helping to teach others and share about ourselves and help them kind of understand their own experiences too.
Yeah, as I think about my experience, and having been in the field for a long time, and I'm a late discovery adoptee, so I didn't find out I was adopted until I was 32. So as I think about my experience, the one thing that always comes to the forefront for me is how, even though there's so many experiences that are universal, there's so many other differences and nuances and things that drive Annette crazy that don't bother me at all, but where I think
Not much bothers you.
that's true.
I'm just gonna say.
But where I think it's important for folks to hear is that our private parts is, for me, it's more about the idea of understanding that I'm a human being. And sometimes in situations like this, where the goal is to share and put all kinds of stuff out there, the things that fascinate people are the private parts. And that's the part that you hear, and it's like, it has an impact on you, but it's not going to help you down the road as you're dealing with your adoptive child's experience. It's just, that's where the porn part comes in. It's just kind of gooey and ooh boy, you know. So I'm hoping that folks are gonna come away with this, with an idea that I have to remember that my adopted child is a person. And as a person, there's some things that you wouldn't say about your sister child, you know, and this adopted child needs to be given that same respect. And where this idea of sharing their business everywhere, you know, parents, and I know I'm an adopted parent as well, so I know we take license with the fact that this child came to us in a unique way. And so we have to just remember in our own minds that how much of us sharing their story is, one, dehumanizing them, and two, feeding the frenzy and feeding the idea that this child is their diagnosis. You know, if you're not mindful about that as you go along, you know, of course, the child hears you talking about them in this way, oh, I'm OCD, I'm AC this, I'm PTS, I'm that, then, you know, you're helping to muddy the waters.
You're firming that up in their head.
Yeah.
You're solidifying what they may actually think. And there's also not only dehumanization, but commodification
Yeah.
that comes with it. There's and this is not my personal experience, but it's stories that I have heard. Well, you know, we paid $50,000 for you. And I'm like, you know, and people are like, I'm not a used car. And I do know that you had your hands up. If it just give me 1 second. For me, coming from the baby scoop era, my parents, I quite literally, my mother would tell me when I would piss her off, which would be often, that they could have returned me. And when I was 23, I found paperwork in their attic, and I, in fact, did have a return policy that said the family is at liberty to return the child at any time if they feel they ought not keep the child. I know someone who used that very same agency within the last 20 years, and that same return policy still does in fact exist. And that's extremely commodifying. The other thing that I will say is that what I am personally going to start to do is actually more talking to Jessica and Chet, because for me, this is what I call emotional labor, to look at you all. This makes me uncomfortable. So forgive me if I'm more going like this, because it is very hard for me, for as outspoken as I am on the issue, it's just very different to look people in the eye and say it. But yes.
So I'm going to just say something real controversial.
Have at it. We like controversy.
Should adoption not be legal? Should adoption not happen?
But you have to ask which one. We're all gonna have different
Yeah.
answers.
I know you're gonna have this answer. I'd like to hear all.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go first. I don't know that it should be illegal. I think it should be rare.
Yeah.
I think it should be rare. I don't think it should be an industry. Simply because we live in a society where money rules.
Right.
So as long as it's an industry, you're gonna have abuses. But I think it should be rare, something that doesn't need to happen. I don't know about outlawing.
For me, it is, there are abolitionists out there. There's a huge abolitionist community. For me, it is not just an industry. It is a multi-billion with a B dollar industry. It is not just an industry. It brings in multi-billions of dollars. I think that there will always be 1, 2, or a handful of cases where adoption is necessary. I think kinship care should be a priority. I think family preservation should be a priority. I think we need to affirm women and give them, you can do it, like a couple of attaboys, and this is how you do it, and you are not unworthy, and you can do this, and your child will need you. So I don't think it should be abolished, but I think that the whole fucking system needs to be burned to the ground and recreated to support families instead of adoption was originally, right, the way it's worded is that it's supposed to be for the best interests of the child. Adoption should not be people having GoFundMes on social media to raise money to adopt a child, because if that mother or that father or that grandmother had a GoFundMe to raise that child, then there would not be a need for that child to be adopted. So it should not be about finding a child for a family. It should be about supporting that child and their current family.
I don't think that it should be outlawed either. I think that there are definitely proactive steps that we as a society could be taking to support mothers, to support families, to stay together. And I think, you know, we see things happening all around the world. We see change happening within the adoption industry. I also agree that I don't think it should be an industry. But I think it's very complicated. There's a lot of what Annette just said that I 100% agree with. I mean, I think that had we have been able to support birth mothers and families, you know, there is trauma in adoption. And, you know, we're sitting up here and we're talking to you about something with a sensational title, and it stems from, you know, the trauma of adoption. So I think that but this is progress, you know, having adoptees in front of adoptive parents, in front of industry professionals, you know, the adoption professionals. This is how we are able to change the narrative and show why it's important that, you know, we really are here. We are the children. We are the adopted children. So it's important for us to be able to show our experiences, to share our feelings, because there's a very big community.
And
I have a question. I understand what you're saying, but then now the agency gave this mother, you know, ample opportunity, mother and father, to do what they need to do for the child. Okay? She decided to leave. She decided to leave 2 years, then come back just before it's time to terminate her rights. Okay? The agency helped her with housing, to get housing and all that. Okay, I said, okay, just do what you need to do to take care of your child. She's supposed to have a visit. She called me from Connecticut. She's not gonna show up. So I said, call a caseworker. You understand what I'm saying? Then dad come in, he has visits. Okay, fine, no problem, but he don't show up. He moves to Kentucky. He comes back 2 years before they do the TPR.
So all of that time.
So my thing is, to this child, and I had him since 5 days old, is he supposed to constantly keep lingering in foster care? You understand what I'm saying?
what about extended family though? Where's the extended family?
Okay.
I'm just gonna say this off the cuff. This is also, I'm happy to answer the questions, but it's also getting out of the realm of being within the
Well, I'm
adopted
trying to tell you
person
about
community,
this.
so I understand.
Grandma didn't want him.
Mhm.
Grandpa said no because he was mixed.
Here's the thing.
He's Latino. You understand what I'm saying? It was like, just like one big thing. They asked him.
Yeah.
And then when we had a visit, I said, well, you know,
Here's the thing.
it's your grandson.
Here's the thing. How many people are involved in your life around this child? How many people are involved in your life as a foster parent, or that person's life as a foster parent around this child?
It's just being my baby.
Okay, it's you, it's the caseworker, it's the supervisor, it's the agency, it's ACS, it's this one and that one, and child's lawyer, this, that, and the other. How much of that went to the birth family? Okay, here's what you have to do. Get housing, get off drugs, and take the child. Mom disappears for 2 years, what's happening? They're just sitting there waiting. If it was truly in the best interest of that child, if family was the most important thing, all of those people would be running around, talking to the daddy in Kentucky, talking to the mom there. You know what I mean? The same energy doesn't go into keeping that child in the family that goes into keeping them in
taking the
foster
child
care.
out.
Okay, but that's
And
not
then we
true.
blame the birth.
That's not
Okay.
true.
And then we blame the mother, right? Then we
No,
blame
no,
the
no,
birth
I'm
mother.
not blaming anybody, but that's not true. When they came to court, they went to Kentucky
Right,
to see if dad had a place ready.
right.
The court, somebody to Kentucky 3 times.
Who was
But again, this
scouring
is
New
not
York?
it. But again,
But
we said that there's always gonna be a.
We're gonna stop.
Oh.
This is their panel, they are the adoptees.
No, I'm
We're-
just
I
asking.
know.
Yeah, no, this is a part of it. This is a part of it, though.
Okay.
This is a part of
And-
it.
and-
Because, wait, you asked us, do we want to destroy the system? You asked us what we wanted to see change. What I want to see change is family to be the most important thing, right? Now, we can understand that. If I were to say to you, which one of your relatives are you willing to push aside and never see again?
None.
Okay, so why should it be okay for Johnny or Janie, who had nothing to do with anything except being born, to be yanked out of their home, to be put, even if, it's not about whether the foster parent is good, bad, or indifferent. The foster parent is not a biological member of that family. And I don't care how bad mommy is, how bad daddy is, every single Johnson is not a Johnson. Every single Johnson is not, the enemy.
True.
If we were worried about the best interest of every child that comes into care, we would make sure that those folks never have to lose their family because mom or dad or whoever else got a problem.
And we would, right, and we would not. So both Dr. Patton and Dr. Fu, right, talked about pre-verbal trauma. So
Right.
whether a parent has a child from 5 minutes, 5 hours,
Right,
5 days,
right.
5 years,
Right.
there is pre-verbal trauma for
Right.
that child, right? Like, I know I was loved by my adoptive family.
Yeah.
Were they perfect?
Right.
Hell no. Was I perfect? Am I a perfect parent now?
Hell no.
Hell no, right? Nobody is. You know better than anyone. Claudia knows better than anyone. Certainly the hell not. But I knew
Right.
as a child, I was raised with my sister, who was the biological child of my adoptive parents. And I knew that there was a different bond between my parents
Yes.
and my sister that I just knew it. I
Yes.
felt it. I felt the difference. Did I tell my parents that I felt it? I told my father because he was more receptive to it.
Mhm.
I didn't tell my mother because my mother would be like Sanford and Son and clutching her chest and saying, I'm killing her and she's gonna die.
I'm gonna join you.
What was my name before you got me? What difference does it make? I don't know, Annette. Well, I was 5 months old. What'd they call me? Hey, you, hey, fat baby, bald baby, you got a big toe, your toenails crooked baby. What difference does it make, Annette? Your name is Annette Marie Daly and we are your parents. Well, it made a difference to me what my name was, right? So I always grew up, I hated the name Kimberly or Kim. If I met someone named Kimberly or Kim, nope, not talking to you, don't like you.
Mhm.
One person I ever met when I was a bartender and she was starting to hang out with my group of friends. And she was all right, but her name was Kim. And I said to her, well, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna call you Sue because I hate your name. So I'm gonna call you Sue. And she was like, well, you're a bartender and maybe you're a little drunk. But then when we would do things sober, I'd be like, hey, Sue. And she wouldn't look and I'd be like, well, I'm not gonna call you your name. I don't like your name. When I found my birth name in the New York City Birth Index in 2014, I found out that my given name was Kimberly and my middle name, I found out when I got my original birth certificate, was Sue. Not Susan, not Suzanne, not Sue. Why did I hate the name Kimberly? Because my pre-verbal trauma, little Annette knew that for 5 months, that's what people called me. And I couldn't put a words to it because grown-up Annette doesn't have a memory of it. So regardless of, yes, family preservation, absolutely key. But regardless of how long you've had a child, and just the expression, I've had the child for so long, is commodifying to begin with to a certain degree, right? It's claiming ownership. I don't say I've had my son for 19 years. I gave birth to my son, but I don't say I've had him. He's my son, he's 19. We don't say. I recently read The Mistress's Daughter by A.M. Holmes. And I'm not a reader, I don't enjoy reading. I'm actually literally going blind, so reading is hard for me. But this book was sent to me by someone that means a lot to me months and months ago, and I thought I should probably crack it open. And so many things stood out to me, but the one line that stood out was, and I'm paraphrasing here, the questions that people feel free to ask adopted people. And one of them that she said was, do you know who your parents are? And she says in it, I had to stop and think about that because that's the kind of question you ask someone who just bumped their head and regained consciousness,
Mhm.
right? And it's true, because when we say we're adopted, people have a ton of questions for us. I had a return policy. When I had my son, nobody at the hospital said, listen, if he's like a little defective and you don't like him too much, and he's not found to be entirely satisfactory to you and your husband, you can bring him back. And if we are to think that adoption is normal, then why, when I had my son 19 years ago, did he have a little band on his ankle that had his number, and I had one, and my husband had one, and they would scan everything to make sure that the right people were getting the right baby? That when they would come in, and I'm not gonna get up because then the camera will see my fat ass, but when they came in to bring him to me to nurse, they scanned my bracelet and then they scanned his ankle. Why couldn't I just nurse any old baby? It's not normal.
Right.
It's not normal.
Right.
We don't like animals to be taken from their mothers. You wanna get a dog from a breeder? They're gonna tell you how long you have to wait before you can get that puppy, because they don't wanna take that puppy from their mother.
But we're yanking babies out of homes and destroying the homes. We're not just yanking the babies out, we're totally disconnecting them as if they died, and then we don't want them to breathe.
And then we're told to be grateful. There is no grieving.
Right.
We're, aren't you grateful? Annette, you could have been living on the streets. You don't know who could have adopted you. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad? Let me ask, raise your hand if you are glad that you were not aborted. Raise your hand if you've been asked, aren't you glad you weren't aborted? You know who raised their hands? The adopted people. Is there anyone else who's adopted? Raise your hand if you're adopted. It's the adopted people who raise their hand for that question, because that is a societal norm. I'm just gonna pretend you're adopted and you're me when I was younger, right? Aren't you glad though? Aren't you grateful that you're here? You could have been on this. You know what? Aren't you glad your mother didn't abort you? Adopted babies are not the only ones who could have been aborted, but society feels that they can ask us those questions. When Claudia and I would go to Albany with our colleagues to lobby, senators and assembly members would look at me, knowing that Claudia was not adopted, and say, aren't you glad you weren't aborted? And my answer would be, aren't you? Has anyone ever asked you? But these are the things that society wants us to be grateful for, and we're the only people. This is very specific to us. Right? Nobody else gets asked, do you know who your parents are? Do you know who your parents are? Who, like, you don't ask people that because it's
like
rude.
Boston on like a department store.
Yes, it's right. And again, it's touching our private parts, right? It's what gives a stranger, a legislator, the mailman who I had to explain why I was at 18 years old, sitting on a stoop, waiting for something to come in the mail. What gives them the right to ask these personal questions? I have often felt, and I will share, knowing that this is being recorded, I will share publicly that I'm getting used to saying survivor because I do use the word victim often. So I am a survivor of sexual assault. I have felt more violated with questions that people have felt they had the right to ask of me than I felt when I was sexually assaulted. I really truly have. And that's why I always said, if I was going to write the book, that's why this would be a part of the book. Because this to me is more violating to a certain degree. And typically the only space where I feel comfortable having those conversations is among adopted people, right? Like, because I know that someone else will say, holy shit, yeah, me too. Or
You know,
I can understand it.
It's a really, I work with kids who are adopted. I work with kids from ages 0 all the way up to adulthood. And these kinds of questions, these, oh, do you know who your real parents are? And, aren't you so grateful? And, these are such, it's such a society norm to be able to ask those questions, because because of the industry behind it, because of what's been said over the years. But what happens when, you know, and I'm working with these kids, right? And I'm an adopted person, so I get to, you know, to hear the things that they're going through, and I get to hear how difficult it is to field those kinds of questions because they're coming into their own identity formation. They are trying to figure out who they are individually, aside from their families, away from people who they may not be biologically connected to. And these kinds of questions, they really kind of, it's like a big dose of reality that you're always going to be kind of looked at as different. And we are different, right? When we're together, we're the same, even though we have our differences. We have our differences in opinion, we have our differences in experience, we have our differences, you know, in the way that we approach our adoptee identity, our adoptee person identity. But these kinds of questions are they're so invasive and they hit you in such a deep way that you internalize them and they become these moments that you have that you realize that people are always going to feel this freedom to be able to ask you questions because if they know that you're an adopted person.
Other.
Right. And the amount of time and the amount of isolation that can create for especially a young person who may not have found their community, who may not know that there's other adopted people out there who have had these experiences is very isolating in your own experience. So, you know, when we just talked a little bit about kind of how, you know, you move out to the world as a family, right? And, you know, your child, I'm an only child. I would watch my parents and people would, you know, ask questions all the time. I didn't look anything like my parents. I have big curly hair, brown skin. My parents were Italian American. My mother had red hair with blue eyes. And my father was, you know, little Italian. And people would come up and ask me very invasive questions or ask my parents invasive questions like, oh, you look like your mother, you know, like just trying to get in, like trying to get the answers. And my parents were really great in being able to understand when people were being invasive or when they were really asking genuine questions and they wanted to know. And they would then kind of figure out, is this a question I want to answer? Is this a person who deserves the whole story? And from how they maneuvered around in spaces with people that we knew, people that we didn't know, I learned how to advocate for myself. I learned that I have agency of my story, I have agency of my identity, because my parents didn't also feel like they always had to be the poster family for adoption. They did not always have to be there out there educating. And there are people who will tell you, you know, as an adopted family, there are going to be people with misconceptions, you know, celebrate adoption, talk about your story, talk about how your family became a family. But what's not being considered in that moment is what the child is experiencing, right? Because they're hearing their parents, oh, well, we got her from Colombia and she came when she was 3 and she's great. So, but you're learning through, you know, I learned so much through my parents. They didn't have these kinds of spaces. They didn't have these kinds of communities where you can meet other adopted parents. You get to hear from adopted people. And you get to, you know, hear the experiences that we have that can cause us some, you know, some trauma in life on top of, you know, the traumas that we've already experienced with bond being broken. So, you know, I think it's all of this is very important to understand. And that's why being in front of you guys and being able to share 3 different perspectives, 3 different experiences is really important. You know, we want people to walk away with the tools that our parents did not have, that the community that we did not have. And there's so much, you know, even Kylie, I hate to call you out here, Kylie, but Kylie has also been a part of these kinds of communities for a long, long time. And, you know, seeing the value of what that means, of feeling not so othered, because you hear other shared experiences, it's a powerful feeling. And you can come into your own identity, you know, this realization of who you are and how you can be in the world when you know that you're one of many and not just on your own.
And the birthday thing, because my sister was the biological child of my parents. On my sister's birthday, my sister heard the story of what aunts and uncles were there and what time mom went into labor and who was there and what dad was doing and whether he was throwing up and all of these things. And on my birthday, it was like, yay, happy birthday, here's a present for Kitty. And I had no stories. I had no pictures. the first picture that I have is actually what I say was my ad. It was like, you know, but my parents were actually to get 2 boys, and my mother would remind me of it when she got mad at me, if I really pissed her off after, if the return policy didn't work, my mother would be like, you know, we were supposed to get 2 boys. I wonder what happened to those 2 boys, that they wouldn't be doing this to me. And for me, it was like the first, they were to get the 2 boys, and then they got a call that there was this newbornish baby with blonde hair and blue eyes, and did they want that instead? And mom and dad talked about it, and they were like, yeah, we'll take the baby over the toddlers, sure. So they basically exchanged. And I would say to my mother, like, yeah, what happened to those boys too? Like, where the hell did they go? Like, now where are those boys? Where did they go? I had no story. So they did. I hate gotcha days. I hate, again, that's a commodifying thing. It's, to me, it's like, meh. But they did have a wonderfully grand story of the day that they brought me home, right? And every year they would tell a story, and I could recite the story to you if I chose to. But then I think about it and I'm like, okay, still it's commodifying. Then when I was 23 and I found papers in my parents' attic, that's when I actually first found out that my name was Kimberly. I didn't find out the Sue until I was 46 when I entered adoption land and found out that my birth name was in this index 60 miles from my doorstep that I never knew about. I was in my attic looking for something for my mom. And they had the beams, and I'm thinner and younger, and I'm balancing on the beams, and I got a flashlight like this, and I'm looking for things, and I find this manila envelope that says, correspondence regarding adoption of Annette Marie Daly, not to be opened by her until her 21st birthday. And I'm like, well, I'm 23 now, but I know this. So I'm opening it up, right? And dear Mr. and Mrs. Daly, in regards to the adoption of Kimberly. Yeah, who the hell is Kimberly? What's, okay. And I read it and I'm like, oh shit, I'm Kimberly. And again, I hated the name, right? Threw up in their attic, went down, climbed, balanced myself, and then climbed down. It was one of those pull down, hatch down, right? Climbed down their little ladder. And I'm like, what is this? What the hell? Well, I don't know, we forgot we had it. I asked you all my life, what is it? I don't know, Annette, it's right there. Well, what difference does it make was still the answer. So I never felt, because my parents were not trauma informed, right? My father, like I said, he was more receptive to me. My father was more like whatever makes you happy kind of person. But I never felt like I had that agency or that autonomy. So one of the reasons why I got into like the legislation and the activism end of it is, like Jessica was talking about, educating adoptive parents. My reason is to make things a little easier for the generations that come behind me. I don't want someone to be in their parents' attic finding their name. I actually thought about bringing the envelope and all of its contents, including the return policy here. And I thought, no, I'm not like that. I'm not willing to go that far with it.
It's good.
Does someone have something?
No, that's the message related to if you have a question.
Oh, okay.
So, as an adopted parent, right, what can we do to help is, like, because yesterday when I went home trying to unpack all this, right, how can I help my children? And so, because we're here, right, we're here, and, you know, so we keep a very open relationship with their birth family. So grandparents see them, aunts and uncles see them, sometimes birth parents see them. Do you think that might be helpful? Like, what can we do to help so that you don't, not that you're not gonna, it's not gonna minimize the loss because the loss is there, but like, what would you guys suggest for us as, is that helpful? Would that?
I think when you come to a crossroads, and should I do this or should I do that? Pretend it was somebody you love. Somebody biologically related. And do whatever you do for them.
I mean, I would say, you know, what you're doing and being, right, and learning, being open and knowing that you don't have the answers, right? And you're willing to hear from all different kinds of perspectives, all different kinds of voices that participate in these conferences. I think that's a very big step, because not everyone is open-minded. Not every adoptive parent also understands that there is still learning to be had after placement, right? So being here is big. I would say, because of the world that I'm in and the work that I've been doing for 20 years, is to find community. Come on, find community for yourself as an adoptive parent, right? Find other adoptive parents, find a community for your child of adopted people. They may or may not be interested in that, but luckily,
And they may or may not be the age to participate in it. Too, if we don't have the
depending,
age, right?
yeah, depending on what you know, what you're looking for. But like, you know, I'm gonna call on Kylie again, because Kylie and I have existed in spaces together in creating community for adopted people and for kids. And you don't necessarily know what it's like when you're going to meet other kids who were adopted, but what you know instantly is that it's a place that you belong, right? It may not be something that they're willing to step into in the immediate, but just by saying these resources are here, I want you to know that, you know, I've looked into this, or I want you to look into it, you know, whatever that may be, that is you understanding that they have an entirely separate experience that they're having in their lives that you may not be able to be a part of, but you can help them find them. And you can also benefit from those kinds of spaces yourself, you know, and listening to the stories, listening to adoptees, listening to the perspective of all different kinds of people, a domestic adoption, kinship, foster family, international, you know, everybody's stories play a big role in what is going to maybe matter in your own child's life, because they're part of the collective. You know, we have very different starts in life, but we share this one big thing together, and it really does bond. And yeah, no, I was gonna say, I mean, you know, I wasn't looking for this as a child. I wasn't looking for other adopted people. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be, you know, I didn't want to be with this other group of people that they share this experience. Like, I wanted to hang out with my friends. But kids are, I think, you know, understanding the importance of finding your community now. I think that there's much more of an awareness of what that is now. And I think searching out those spaces and virtual spaces and all kinds of things that could just give your child resources makes them know that you are a place where they can come to find some sort of comfort, some sort of information. Even if you don't have all the answers, you're willing to be there and say, I don't know the answers, let's find
That's
answers
fine,
together.
right? And I think I would also, I know you have your hands up, Pat, but I just want to answer this also. I would say, like, you know, when I grew up, I'm 110 years old, I had to go to the library and there were card catalogs, or someone put the book back on the wrong shelf, you were screwed, right? Kids have the world in the palm of their hands, right? I have told my son since he's 19 now, I told him since he was in 5th grade and got a cell phone. You literally hold more technology in the palm of your hand than we used to send a man to the moon. So not knowing the age of your child, I don't even want to know the age of your child, right? Contingent on age, they're going to use technology to find their answers anyway. And what I would recommend to any parent to do is to do the same. Google, how do I tell my adopted child this? And the first handful of answers are invariably going to be agencies. Keep going, even if you have to go to the 2nd or the 3rd page, until you find the voices of the adopted people. Because our voices have become so elevated that we are coming up closer to the top in search bars. If you search New York State birth certificates for adopted children, AFFCMY will come up, NYORC, the New York Adoptee Rights Coalition will come up. My friend and colleague Greg Luce from Adoptee Rights Law Center in Minnesota will come up. We are the first 2 pages now, and then after that come the agencies. So we have been reclaiming our power, but as I told my son, like, use the power that you hold in the palm of your hands to seek out your answers. And if you can't find them, call Chester at the helpline. Not me. Unless you want to hear me say, this is what.
I just want to answer, well, I just want to share, you're Rachel, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I would recommend the book that just got published. It's called You Should Be Grateful by Angela Tucker. Because she really, I actually, after having read the whole book, I really believe she wrote that book for adoptive parents or parents, because she answers that question beautifully. She actually makes the distinction between old adoptees, and she's 37 years old and considers herself one of the old adoptees, and the younger adoptees who go through life being connected to their original family.
Yeah.
She talks about them having some sort of stratosphere, and part of their stratosphere, their extended family, are their actual extended family. So their discussions, she's a mentor to a lot of younger adoptees, and their discussions are so different than the discussions that she would have had at that age, because she had no contact with anybody. She's one of the old adoptees from closed adoption. So if you got something going on where family is involved, their family, their original family, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think if you read, you should be grateful. And by the way, it's the should part that really pisses her off.
Right.
Nobody should be anything. But it's a beautiful book for adoptive parents to read.
Yeah.
And it just got published, it's got the most recent research, and she weaves it nicely between her personal story and a lot of the literature and the research.
There's also another book called We've Been There by Susan T-Books. And she interviewed, she's an adoptive parent, but she interviewed other adoptees, teenage adoptees around the country to share their story. And it's their own story. It's not narrated by anyone, but she just compiled them. And I think that.
And I think, and I do see that, if you could just give me 1 second also, I think that too, everyone needs to be careful of where your story ends and the child's story begins. I'm gonna be 56 years old this year. My sister is older than I am. My adoptive sister, and I only say that for clarification purposes when I'm in spaces like this. She has been my biggest supporter through everything that I've done. Having said that, she knows, and she's become an advocate within, she doesn't live in New York, she's become an advocate within her own state for adopted people's rights to birth certificates and for adopted people not to be othered. And she will say, my sister is adopted and I know how she feels. And if you would like more information, let me see if I can give you let me check with her and see if I can give you her email, her phone number, her Facebook, whatever. She will not tell other people my story because it's not her story to tell. And her, just as simple as her intonation may be different than what my intonation would be, right? So like, and I'm not entirely comfortable sharing as much stuff with her as I do, you know, with my people, right? Not that my sister's not, but these are my people. And she's very well aware of that. So I would ask you too to be aware that, like, even if you're sitting with your child and saying, okay, I don't have the answers, as Jessica said, but let's find them. Or how do you feel about this? And you're trying to give them agency. Just know that what they're saying may not be entirely the truth because they're not looking to hurt your feelings or make you sad or angry either.
There is reservation. We always have reservation with our parents. I mean, what I would always say to parents is that, for such a long time, you guys are our first line of defense. You don't want anything to hit us. You don't want anything to get to us. But it happens very early on for adoptees, especially for those who may not look like their parents or who are, transracial, transnational. It happens very early where we start to say, we don't want you to get hurt. So the feelings, the thoughts and the questions will never be verbalized because we also don't even know how to say what we're feeling, right? That's another reason why I think it's so important to find community for young people, because they're able to find the vernacular. They're able to find the words within hearing from one another about how they're feeling. And there may be things that your children never bring home to you, and that's okay too. It's giving them, knowing that they can find support in spaces where they can be themselves and they can hear from other people. And they'll bring home to you if your relationship is open, if everybody is willing and everyone is, that day on the same page or whatever the case is, they may share with you some of the things that they experience.
But it's emotional labor.
It is.
Even with those that we're closest to.
Right.
Like I can feel myself now. I'm red in the face, right? I only really get red in the face when I drink. So like, I can feel myself now, like, this is not my comfort zone, like I said, like, this is just not my comfort zone. I'm like, okay, I'm blotching, I'm starting to itch, I feel like I'm having an allergic reaction, but my allergic reaction is to myself, right? It's my own internal stuff that's to myself. And I keep telling myself, okay, but someone in the generation behind you is gonna hear something, or someone is gonna go home and maybe understand their child a little bit more. But you have your hand up for a bit, so I'm sorry.
Passionate, that's all I'm gonna say.
I am fat and I am passionate.
But that's okay. I'll tell you why that's okay. Because you need different types of people to make sure that change happens. And sometimes you're the one that's up there, like in front of the politicians, and you have to do that. But I want to share the story. I work in psychiatry, so I got two parts. I have adopted children. I don't know, maybe they didn't talk to me about it, but they don't want people to know they're adopted. But
Because
they
it's
are
other, because they're
adopted,
other.
and people know, but because we've had them so long, they don't look at themselves as adopted children. But I'm gonna go to a client that I have. My client lost her children because she was getting hot. I work in psychiatry. And she went, got herself clean, married a Jewish guy with a lot of money. I'm telling you, she hustled. Married a Jewish guy with a lot of money, went back, her children were adopted. You know, she went back, I don't know how she got access to her children. She went back. And I say to myself, if the parent wants to do it, they will find ways, because that's what you were talking about. They will find ways. And I always wonder what gave her the strength, because she said, that child came through me. And I heard someone tell me that this is not my child. She said, that wasn't gonna happen, because that is my child. I don't care where they send my child. And I listen to you and I think about her voice. She got her children back, but it didn't work out.
And there are
Adopted out?
Yeah.
And there are
No, when I
adopted-
say she got access to them because she found out where they were. But what happened is that her daughter said to her, Mom, I'm staying here until I'm 18. This is what her daughter said to her. I'm gonna stay here until I'm 18. And after I'm 18, then I'll come back.
I'll come back to you. And there are adopted people who had their adoptions annulled.
Well, her son came back to her. He told the people he was staying with, he said, no, I'm going back to my mother. But she returned to drugs. So that's a whole nother problem. But she's back with me now and she's clean 2 years. So that's fine. But I'm telling you, it's two sides of the spectrum.
There always are.
And we're happy to hear your side.
There always are, thank you, and there always are. I will tell you, because you said like that child came out of me, right?
She said,
Again, I just identified as being adopted. Like, I'd be like, hey, I'm Annette, I'm adopted. There were kids when I was in elementary school who were foster children and being adopted, and I went to Catholic school, and the nun made cupcakes because someone was being a foster child being adopted, and I cried. And the nun said, why are you crying? And I was like, I'm adopted, ain't no one ever made me cupcakes. And they sent me down to the principal's office, and the principal, who was also a nun, was like, why are you crying? And I said, well, you know, I'm adopted and ain't no one ever made me cupcakes. And I went home and my mother, who was all 5'2", was standing at the front door like this. And she said, did you tell the sisters that you were adopted? And I said, yeah. And she said, why? I said, well, because I am. And she said, but why? And I was like, because ain't no one ever made me cupcakes because I was adopted, right? The next day I went to school and the nuns had cupcakes for me, right? So I've always identified as being this. Both of my adoptive parents died in 2010 within 3 months of each other. I was the primary caregiver for both of them. I was at both of their sides when they both passed away. In 2014, and I had nightmares for a long time about my parents, and they were older. They didn't die suddenly. And I had nightmares. In 2014, I woke up one night around St. Patrick's Day and I punched my husband. And I said, I have to find my mother. And he said, listen, I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're having one of your nightmares again, you're gonna need to go back to sleep. He said, Annette, they're dead. They've been dead for 4 years. You're gonna have to get over the nightmares. I gotta get up for work, go back to sleep. And he put his head down and I elbowed his head and I said, not that one, the other one. And I had this, and I had tried searching when I was younger. We had no internet. I had sat waiting for the postman, right? I'd done what I could do. The only way that I could describe it is something inside of me was screaming that I needed to find my mother. 3 weeks later, I find out that the names at that point were in the birth index in New York City. My husband and my son, who was 10 at the time, go down 2 weekends in a row until we find my name. I'm crying in the library. There's like lots of karma and kismet going on. My great niece was born literally 2 minutes after I found my name. It was like, you know, everything in the family, the stars were aligning. get in the car, I'm driving from New York City back to Orange County, but we were stopping in Paramus. If anyone knows the distance, it's a maybe 20-minute drive. By the time I got home, I had found a picture of my phone of my birth mother. I found the name. This was great. It led me to my birth mother. I saw her face. It was pretty much this face. My soul knew it was my birth mother.
Wow.
So now my husband and my son go into the golf store in Paramus, and I'm like, I'm gonna stay in the car because I'm gonna find more about what I can find about this woman. This is my mother. And I find that my mother had ALS. And she was still alive, but she was in the final stages of it. And my feeling goes with what your client, right? The story of that child came out. Something inside of me knew that the clock was ticking and I needed to get my answers now. Because I truly believe that no time nor distance will separate the bond between a mother and a child. Katie, you had your hand up.
I'm just your timekeeper. You have 14 minutes, and I wanted to make sure you had time to say what you
You've
wanted to
been
say.
very quiet. Open your mouth.
A few things. We spend a lot of time in this industry talking about all these cases of 17 years later, 30 years later, 29, going through the snow and climbing and all that. If we had just dealt with the problem at hand, if we had just dealt with it at the door, we wouldn't have to have these brave stories of swimming through lakes and fighting alligators and, and that just maddens me to no end. Because what we're doing is what we always do. We find solutions to the problems that we've created instead of dealing with it before it got to be that big a problem. That's what I'm talking about. This whole idea of the best interest of the child, it's bullshit. It's bullshit from the beginning. Because none of us would want to be separated from our people. That's never going to be in anybody's best interest.
Again, if it was natural, why couldn't I breastfeed any baby in the nursery?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
If it was normal, why couldn't I?
Exactly. But we pretend that it's about the best interest of the child, and then we keep banging our head against the wall saying, well, that can't be in the best interest of the child, that can't be in the best interest of the child. And then we find ourselves 5 years down the road, and of course they're doing things that don't make any sense anymore. And those things didn't have to happen if we really care at the entry level. If we really care, if we put all that effort and energy into making sure that Johnny or Janie or whatever loss they have to suffer right now, that's it. There won't be any more because of us.
And because intergenerational trauma is real.
Right.
Right? Intergenerational
Right.
trauma,
But
it is
that's
real.
the only way we're going to stop it.
I
Because all we're doing now is we're creating more and more intergenerational trauma.
Right.
Because we're traumatizing the children we came to save from being traumatized.
And we're traumatizing their children
And we're
too, because I
traumatizing their
can
children
see,
and on and on and on.
I
We
can
gotta go,
see-
at some point, we gotta start shrinking the door.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about cures for the side effects of us opening the door. We gotta start shrinking the door. And when we go to talking about adoptive parents, I want adoptive parents to understand that the most important thing you can give your child is you. Right? You don't have to fix it. You're never going to be able to fix what's wrong. Never. You're wasting your time. Don't focus on that. Focus on what about me? What can I do? What can I change? Because that you can change the way you do whatever you do. What can I do right now that's going to be healing for this child? Not about fixing the child's injuries. You can't do anything with that. But you can find a way to make a space for that child in your life so that they can drag that wagon full of shit as long as they need to drag it.
and it wasn't their choice to have that
Right,
wagon.
but they got it. They got it. Don't try to take the wagon away. Don't envision someday when it's not gonna happen.
Don't put bows on it, and
Right.
glitter on it, make
Your
it
job
pretty,
is
it's
just to
still a
help
lovely
them
wagon.
walk with it. Every now and then you're gonna have to push it. Every now and then you're gonna have to pull them. But help them walk with it, just like you would if it was anything else. And that's why I say go back to thinking about this child like if this was my sister's kid. What would I do? And if you do something different for your sister's kid, then you need to figure that out. That's not on that child.
And
You need to figure that out.
And I think too, Chester, and you and I have talked about this, is very few, I typically would say no parent, but I'm gonna go very few, just because I'll be nice. Very few parents who adopt do so because they actually want someone else's kid. They actually wanted their
No,
own
of
kid
course,
first, and
of
for whatever
course,
reason, they
of
couldn't
course.
have their own kid.
course.
So we're made to fill a void. And I would advise anyone, whether you are currently an adoptive parent, whether you're thinking about it, deal with your shit before you adopt
Absolutely.
if you can.
Absolutely.
Deal with your own mess.
And then deal with it
Because-
as you go
Because
on.
we're being made to fill this void, and we, at whatever age, whether it's pre-verbal, whether it's a toddler, a teenager, we now have our own void. So you're taking me as this water bottle and you're trying to make me fit on this piece of paper, and I'm never gonna perfectly fit there, but your biological person would have fit there. I have friends who have both biological and adoptive kids, and they are very honest with me, and they say that the bond is in fact different. My son inherited my shit. I see it all the time, and I go, Jesus Christ, I did this to my kid. And then I have to realize I didn't do it to him because I didn't do it to myself. It was done to me. And he has inherited this fear of abandonment, this fear of anyone leaving him, this fear of not knowing where someone is, and this fear. But what he also did, because he was part of what saved me to a certain degree, is he also went on to become a first responder. So he's trying, right? He's going out to try to save other people, also in the same way that I'm trying to save other people. And that, while it's an admirable quality, also stems from a form of intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, just, I mean, totally, what Annette just said in regard to why I and my wife at the time adopted a child was totally not for the reasons of the child, it was for our own reasons. But I just want you to know, half the universe, particularly at conferences like this, they actually came forward to parent children who needed to return home. Now, when they couldn't return home, they had to make a decision on whether to adopt or not adopt a child that they have a bond to, but they didn't come forward to adopt that child. So I just want you to know, we are dealing with two almost parallel universes.
Well, absolutely, and that's why none of us said that.
No, you said, I'm gonna qualify by saying, really, nobody does this. And then you say, allow a few.
Right.
I'm just saying, it's a hell of a lot more than a few.
But it's
Because
but it's
most of the
also,
people who are adopting in this state, in this room, did not come forward.
but it's also
to be
why I
adopted,
said
yes.
that adoption should not be illegal, because I do think that there is always a place for it, just to
I'm
qualify
going
that.
back to something else to say.
No, I understand exactly what I
And
said.
I was told not to adopt my son, so thank you for saying.
Oh, and by the way, the coalition, just so you know, there was a rule back in the 70s when we started that foster parents were not allowed to adopt children that were bonded to them, that they've lived with for years. And the coalition single-handedly helped change that rule, just so you know.
I was told not to adopt my son, and I'm gonna tell you what happened. He was out of control. His own mother told me this, his own biological mother. But I worked in psychiatry, so I took the time, my husband and I, to make sure that he would be okay. It took a lot. People didn't want their children near him. We were told, oh, no, he's not gonna do well. Look at all the issues he has. You shouldn't adopt him. And by the way, if you adopt him, we're gonna remove the little girl out of your home because she doesn't need to be around him. Yes, I thought, you know some of my rights. And what I did is I adopted him. And then I went after them about my little girl. And then when they made a good point because he had violence. My mother took her because I knew how to fight them. I went to the law guardians, and the law guardian said, you explained it so well, we're fighting with you, but now we can't be the law guardian to the children because we're on your side. What I'm saying to you is that there are people who have adopted children that the agency themselves did not want us to adopt. And when you do that, it's from the heart.
Yes.
It is from the heart.
I'm gonna add one piece. I would say that no parent on earth has a child because decides to have a child for any other need but their own. No parent on earth. So to pretend that foster parents or any other kind of parent is somehow exempt from that, it's always driven by us as the adult. It's our need to have a child. That's why we have children, not because I know there's an unborn child that's out there and I'm going to be better for them than them not being here. That's all I'm saying. Understand that we're conflating two things here. There's always going to be people who do fit the who want to do the honorable whatever. But if we understand that all of it stems from our need first, no matter what the situation is, whether it's adopted, biological, whatever, then that gives you some context for it. You know, this is not a safe conversation for us to have, because the whole point, the whole point of our discussion is that adoptees can have a certain peace with each other in a space where they're all in the same boat. Now, I'm an adopted parent. I get it. I like to think I adopted my kids because they were kids who needed homes and blah, blah, blah. But I adopted my kids out of my need. And I understand that. That doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make it a bad decision. It's just a fact. Just like I have no hair and brown eyes and whatever. You know what I mean? We don't have to put the big cape on and make it something special. That's where we get in trouble.
Right, well,
Because then we're disappointed when our children don't turn out to be the worthy superhero children of ours. Right. Rachel's got a hand.
wait, can I just say one thing first, Rachel? I'm sorry. I also want to say that this presentation was also to give you an insight into the adopted person's perspective. So when you all ultimately did that, you took my agency away from me. So I'm saying what I say as no one, as the adopted person, right? Someone else's experience may be different, but myself as an adopted person, that's how I feel. So when I'm now being told that's no different than someone saying to me, aren't you glad you were adopted? Or the reason why we named our adoptee support group just adoptees, because we've been told, well, you're just adopted. It doesn't matter. You're the one who's adopted. It doesn't matter. I should not have to preface anything, but now it's too late to preface. So I will prequel with, I wasn't trying to insult anybody. I was trying to give you all insight into my feelings and my world.
No, we never said you were trying to insult us.
No, but that's how that's how I feel, right? So that's how I feel. So that's the reason why. Rachel. And I don't know if anyone online has anything, but we have about
No,
2 minutes. Okay, thank you. We have about 2 minutes.
So I will say,
Jane will give you a turn.
I will say from my personal experience, right? So my husband and I came to the table because we wanted to help. It wasn't, we had 4 beautiful biological children. We wanted to help. So that's my perspective, right? But we've seen a lot of great movement in the right direction. And what I can tell you is, as a foster parent, I've linked arms with birth moms and I've celebrated their getting their children back. And I've been on panels telling foster parents that these are these people's children's first, right? And you don't get to decide who you get to adopt. So like, I'm there, right? But then there are some parents who can't get out of their addictions, right? So I think it's a place.
And
where
there
we
are
all
adoptive
have
and
to
foster
come-
parents who are also addicted and who are also abusive. And
Yeah.
there is no
Agreed.
follow-up, right? You all who want to adopt, you have to go through your MAP training and all of these classes and all that, and there's home studies and there's home visits and all of that. The second that judge puts a stamp on the paper that the adoption is final, nobody comes back to check. And that needs to be burned to the ground too, in my opinion. Why does no one come back to check? Because I could make it look, I could say, here, let me tell you something, I have a college education. I can sit here and I can speak very eloquently, but I don't, because I want everyone to hear the raw, right? So I could make it look like I am wonderful and I'm extremely articulate and well-spoken and all of these great things. And then when you flush out that door, you're gonna hear me say, burn the shit to the ground. I'll be like, wasn't that the same nice lady over there who did that? And that's what happens often in adoption too. It is. I know people who have been adopted 3 and 4 times because they were returned. Jane, one of you can wrap us up, Jane, because we're over time.
I just wanted to make a couple of referrals on books, if that's okay. And for adoptive parents, I think and we were talking about it, Becky and I. if you haven't read The Primal Wound, it's a really good book to read. And it's written by an adoptive parent who also has a biological child and she's a therapist, and she witnessed the difference in the bonding, and it's just gives a great insight that I think is helpful. And then, regarding adoption and the laws, there's a new book out, and you guys might know the story, and it's a wonderful expose on all the problems in the legal system and the laws.
Are you gonna say American Baby?
No, we were once a family. A story of love, death, and child removal in America. These 6 Black children were adopted by 2 white women and drove them off the cliff and killed the whole family in California in 2008.
Adoptees United, we had Adoptees United just did an
I know,
interview with a
it's great.
reporter who covered that story and who wrote the book.
She's a great researcher.
We just did an interview
She's not
with her, yeah.
adoptee, so her perspective is from a research and journalistic point of view, and her research is fantastic.
The book just came out and it is
Yeah.
absolutely
They
amazing.
jumped off the cliff with the children in the car.
In California, the one who drove off the cliff into the water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a great book, and it's well researched.
We're done.
We are just about done. I did want to say, for anyone who isn't familiar with with AFF-CNY's reframing program, AFF-CNY's reframing program jumps off on night 1, talking about grief and loss for the adoptee, for a birth parent, and for the adoptive parent. So it is a fantastic resource for beginning the conversation and also reframing how we're parenting children who come from difficult places.
And we, again, at the coalition, Chester and I run a group for adult adopted people, 18 years or over, just adoptees. It is the 4th Wednesday of every single month. We also run professional adoptees networking, which is again for adult adopted people who work and volunteer within this field. I forgot to say about myself too, I'm also a search angel. I helped over 200 adopted people find their biological families. And if adoption was normal, that many people wouldn't have searched. Within the first 8 months of passing the birth certificate legislation, over 20,000 New York adoptees applied for their birth certificate. Kylie helps to run the group for teens, which is 2 separate groups, and I'm sorry that I always mess up the ages.
10 to 14 and then 15 to the cusp of 18.
And that's also once a month, affcny.org/RSVP. You can find them all. Jessica, self-promote.
I run all of the programming that we provide, like I said, to adoptees and their families through Spence Chapin, which is an adoption agency based in Union Square in Manhattan. We have programming for ages 0 through adulthood. So within children's play groups, within adoptive parent spaces, conversational spaces, therapeutic spaces, two mentorship programs, junior mentorship 10 to 12, teen mentorship 13 to 18. We do monthly meetings with our kids. We have adult adopted mentors over the ages of 21. So it's about a 1-to-1 ratio. But we do events within Manhattan, whether on site, which are more conversational event activity-based days, or we're out in Manhattan doing something fun. And then we have Voices of Adoption, which is a virtual space that we host just like the AFF-CNY space for adoptees that are ages 18 and over. And then we now have Teen Voices of Adoption, which is for adoptees 13 to 17 years old. And these are all groups that are both free, the 2 Voices of Adoption groups. And they welcome people from all around the world. all different kinds of stories.
And it,
Bilingual? Do
But
we have bilingual resources for families,
within,
literature in Spanish?
absolutely, within the agency, within the organization, absolutely, sure.
Do we do searches to find because all of his siblings are adopted. And I know one is MDR, that's about all I know. He never seen her, she never seen him. And it's like, here's another sister they left, it's like, there's 5 of them.
Yeah.
I have one, and we trying to find them. Nobody seemed to give us information. That's what I wanted to find out. What do we do? I want him to know. I want him to know his birth parent. I want him to get to know him. I want him to get to know his siblings. But I reach out, they don't reach back. He even called with my phone. And she answered. She was with a man, looked him dead in the face, hung up.
I'm so sorry,
I
but
called Dad. I just want
Yeah,
to
we
know
can
how
leave the
to
recording.
Yeah.
we've kind of come to the end of our,
We can
You
cut
know,
the
there are
recording
certain
too.
emails, like Annette has said, through the organization that I